I've been a homicide detective for 17 years, and I thought I'd seen every variation of human cruelty dressed up in expensive suits and legal loopholes. But nothing prepared me for Garrett Holloway. Nothing prepared me for the impossible geometry of his case, where evidence pointed in directions that shouldn't exist, where timelines collapsed into paradox, and where a bullet traveled from a gun that had already been reduced to molten slag 3 weeks before it killed. They called him the Gold King on wheels. Garrett Holloway built his fortune from nothing, started with a single claim in Nevada, turned it into the largest privately owned gold mining operation in North America, then diversified into gold futures, precious metal funds, jewelry empires. By 45, he was worth somewhere north of $8 billion. But Garrett didn't live like the other billionaires. No penthouses in Manhattan, no yachts in Monaco. He lived on his custom Harley-Davidson, a machine worth more than most people's houses, cruising between his properties, sleeping in luxury motorhomes, broadcasting his life to 12 million followers on social media. He wore leather and denim, not Armani. He spoke in growls and profanity, not corporate polish. And he absolutely, categorically did not give a damn what anyone thought of him. I first heard his name on a Tuesday morning in October when my captain called me into her office and closed the door. The air conditioning was broken again, and her office smelled like burnt coffee and old case files. She looked tired, more tired than usual. "We've got a body in Black Ridge Canyon," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. "Vivian Holloway, wife of Garrett Holloway, shot once in the back of the head, execution style, found by the housekeeper this morning." I remember the weight of that folder in my hands. I remember thinking that this was going to be one of those cases that ends careers, one way or another. "Any suspects?" I asked. "Just one." She tapped the folder. "The husband. He was there. No forced entry, security system disabled from the inside, and he's got powder residue on his hands. Plus, the marriage was falling apart. We've got witnesses who'll testify they'd been fighting for months, open and shut. Nothing is ever open and shut, not in my experience. I drove out to Black Ridge Canyon that afternoon. The Holloway estate sprawled across 40 acres of desert hillside, all glass and steel and architectural ambition. The kind of place where you could die in one wing and no one would find you for days in another. Security had already cordoned off the master bedroom, and the forensics team was still photographing the scene when I arrived. Vivian Holloway lay face down on the marble floor beside her bed, wearing a silk nightgown the color of champagne. She'd been beautiful once. I could see that even now. 42 years old, blonde hair going gray at the temples, the kind of elegant bone structure that ages gracefully. The bullet had entered at the base of her skull, angled slightly upward. Quick, professional. No struggle. No defensive wounds. She probably never knew what was coming. "Single shot," the medical examiner told me, crouching beside the body. 9mm, maybe .45 caliber. We'll know more after the autopsy, but look at this. He pointed to her hands. No residue, she didn't fire a weapon. And see the lividity pattern? She's been dead between 8 and 12 hours. Puts time of death somewhere between midnight and 4 a.m. I walked the room slowly, taking in the details. A glass of water on the nightstand, half empty, a book face down on the bed, some literary novel I didn't recognize, her phone on the charger, screen dark. Everything spoke of routine, of someone preparing for sleep with no expectation of violence, except for the blood. That spoke of something else entirely. "Where's the husband?" I asked. "Downstairs, in the library. He's been there since we arrived, hasn't said a word except to ask for his lawyer." I found Garrett Holloway sitting in a leather chair that probably cost more than my car, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the desert beyond. He wore jeans and a black t-shirt, his leather jacket draped over the chair beside him. His hands, those hands that had built an empire, that had gripped motorcycle handlebars across 6 continents, rested on the armrests, perfectly still. He looked up when I entered, and I saw something in his eyes that I couldn't quite identify. Not guilt, not fear, something closer to resignation. "Mr. Holloway," I said, "I'm Detective Marcus Caney. I need to ask you some questions about your wife. She's dead, he said. His voice was rougher than I expected, scraped raw by years of cigar smoke and shouting over engine noise. What else is there to know? How about who killed her? He smiled, but there was no humor in it. You think I did. I can see it in your face. You've already decided. I haven't decided anything. I'm investigating. That's my job. Your job. He stood up, and I was struck by his physical presence. Garrett Holloway was 6'3", built like someone who'd spent his life doing manual labor before the money came. Tattoos covered both arms, intricate designs of gears and gold veins and road maps. Your job is to find someone to blame, someone the public can hate, someone whose conviction will look good on the evening news, and here I am. Convenient. Where were you between midnight and 4 a.m.? Right here, in this house, in my workshop in the East Wing. I was restoring a vintage carburetor. Alone. Anyone who can verify that? No, Vivian and I didn't share a bedroom anymore, hadn't for 8 months. We lived in the same house, but separate lives. You'll find plenty of people willing to tell you about our marriage, how it was broken, how we fought, how I'm a terrible human being who cared more about my motorcycles than my wife. He moved to the window, pressed his forehead against the glass. They won't be wrong. I spent the next 3 days building the case against him. The evidence accumulated like snowfall, steady, undeniable, suffocating. The powder residue on his hands matched the discharge pattern of a recently fired weapon. Security footage showed no one else entering or leaving the estate between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Vivian's blood spatter on a pair of leather gloves found in Garrett's workshop, gloves with his DNA inside them. Financial records showing that Vivian had been planning to file for divorce, that she would have been entitled to nearly half his fortune. Witness statements from staff members who'd heard them arguing viciously just 2 days before her death. And then there was the gun. The ballistics report came back on Friday. The bullet extracted from Vivian's skull had been fired from a Colt M1911, .45 caliber, serial number filed off but metallurgic analysis pointing to a specific production run from 2019. The rifling marks were distinctive, the striations unique as a fingerprint. We could match that bullet to a specific weapon if we found it. Except we'd already found it. Or rather, we'd found what was left of it. 3 weeks before Vivian's murder, Garrett Holloway had broadcast one of his infamous live streams to his 12 million followers. The video was still online. I watched it 17 times, looking for anything I might have missed. In it, Garrett stood in the desert outside Las Vegas, surrounded by cameras and a crowd of fans. He held up a Colt M1911, the metal gleaming in the afternoon sun. This, he told the camera, is the gun I used to kill my first business partner. The crowd had gone silent. Even through the screen I could feel the shock ripple through them. Just kidding. He grinned that wild, reckless grin. But seriously, this weapon represents everything wrong with my past. Violence, paranoia, the belief that power comes from intimidation. I carried this for 10 years. Never fired it at a person. Thank God. But I carried it. And I'm done with that version of myself. Then he'd placed the gun in a custom furnace, live on camera, and melted it down. The video showed the metal liquefying, running like mercury, the distinctive shape of the M1911 dissolving into shapeless slag. Millions of people watched. I watched. The gun ceased to exist. But the bullet that killed Vivian came from that gun. The ballistics expert explained it to me twice, and I still barely understood. The striations are a match, she said, pointing to the comparison images on her screen. See these marks? These grooves? They're created by microscopic imperfections in the barrel. Every gun leaves a unique signature. This bullet was fired from that specific Colt M1911. There's no doubt. But the gun was destroyed. I saw the video, but this bullet doesn't care what I saw. The evidence doesn't lie. I sat in my car outside the forensics lab for an hour, trying to make sense of it. How do you fire a bullet from a gun that no longer exists? Time travel? Impossibility made flesh. Or something simpler, something I was missing? I went back to Garrett Holloway. He was in county lockup by then, held without bail. The holding cell smelled like disinfectant and despair, and Garrett looked smaller in the orange jumpsuit, less like a mythic figure and more like a tired, middle-aged man facing the end of everything. "The bullet came from your gun," I told him. "The Colt you burned in Vegas." He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw genuine confusion cross his face. "That's impossible." That's what I thought. But ballistics doesn't lie. The striations match. "That bullet was fired from your gun, Garrett. How is that possible if you destroyed it 3 weeks ago?" "I don't know." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I don't know, Detective, but I didn't kill Vivian. I swear to you. Whatever happened, whatever impossible thing you think you've discovered, I didn't pull that trigger." "Then who did?" "That's your job to figure out, isn't it?" I dug deeper. I always dig deeper. It's both my greatest strength and my most crippling obsession. I can't let go. Even when the case seems closed, even when everyone else has moved on, I keep pulling at loose threads until the whole tapestry unravels. I started with Vivian. Who was she really? Beyond the society pages and charity galas, beyond the role of billionaire's wife, I interviewed her friends, her family, her therapist. A picture emerged of a woman trapped in a gilded cage, married to a man who'd grown increasingly unstable as his wealth grew, but also, surprisingly, a woman with her own secrets. She had a son, her sister told me, sitting in her modest apartment in Phoenix, so different from the world Vivian had inhabited. From before she married Garrett, his name was Oliver. She gave him up for adoption when she was 19. Closed adoption. She never knew where he went. But about a year ago he found her, contacted her. They'd been meeting in secret. Did Garrett know? I don't think so. Vivian was terrified of telling him. Garrett had this thing about family, about bloodlines. He was obsessed with legacy. Finding out his wife had a son she'd kept hidden? I think she was afraid of how he'd react. I tracked down Oliver. It took me 4 days of following paper trails and sealed records, but I found him. Oliver Chen, 24 years old, working as a mechanic in Tucson. He agreed to meet me at a coffee shop downtown, and when he walked in, I saw Vivian's face in his features, the same bone structure, the same intelligent eyes. "I didn't kill her," he said before I could even ask. "I know how this looks. Secret son shows up, mother dies, there's probably money involved. But I didn't want anything from her. I just wanted to know her, to understand where I came from." "Did you ever meet Garrett?" "Once. Vivian arranged it. About 3 weeks before she died. She finally worked up the courage to tell him the truth." Oliver's hands shook as he lifted his coffee cup. He went insane, absolutely lost it. Started screaming about betrayal, about lies. He said Vivian had poisoned their entire marriage with her deception. Then he left, got on his motorcycle and disappeared for 2 days. When he came back, Vivian told me he'd done that live stream, the one where he burned the gun. The timeline clicked into place. The revelation about Oliver, the rage, the symbolic destruction of the weapon. But it still didn't explain the impossible bullet. I went back further into Garrett's history, before the billions, before the fame, before the leather and motorcycles became his brand. I found military records. Garrett had served in the army, stationed in Afghanistan for 2 tours. Honorable discharge, commendations for bravery, but also notes about anger management issues, about difficulty adjusting to civilian life. I found old police reports from his 20s, bar fights and assault charges that had been quietly settled with money. And I found something else, a business partner, Thomas Merrick, Garrett's original partner in the first mining operation, the one that started everything. They discovered the initial gold vein together, filed the claim together, built the first operation together. And then Thomas had died. Officially, it was a mining accident, a tunnel collapse in their Nevada claim. But the insurance investigation had raised questions about the structural integrity of the support beams, about whether someone might have deliberately weakened them. Nothing was ever proven. Garrett inherited Thomas's share of the operation and built his empire. I tracked down Thomas's widow. She lived in a nursing home in Reno, her mind mostly gone to dementia, but she had moments of clarity. In one of those moments, she looked at me with eyes that held decades of grief and said, "Garrett killed him." I always knew. He wanted it all for himself. The gold, the glory, everything, and he took it. But even that revelation didn't solve my central problem. The bullet, the impossible bullet from the destroyed gun. I was driving home late one night, exhausted and frustrated, when the pieces finally began to assemble themselves. I pulled over on the side of the highway and called the ballistics expert. "The gun Garrett burned," I said. "Is there any way to tell when it was last fired? Before the video?" "Not from the slag, no, but we could check the gun's service history if it had one. Registration records, range records, that sort of thing." "Do it. I need to know every time that gun was fired and when." The answer came back the next morning. The Colt M1911 that Garrett had burned had been test-fired at the factory in 2019, then purchased by Garrett that same year. It had been registered to him, but there was no record of it ever being fired at a range or cleaned by a gunsmith or serviced in any way. According to every official record, that gun had never been fired outside the factory, which meant the bullet in Vivian's skull had been fired years ago, before Garrett even owned the gun publicly, and stored, preserved, waiting. I returned to the Holloway estate with a search warrant. This time I wasn't looking for obvious evidence. I was looking for hiding places, secret compartments, the kinds of spaces where someone might store something for years, waiting for the perfect moment. I found it in Garrett's workshop behind a false panel in the wall, a small safe, temperature-controlled, humidity-regulated. Inside, 3 bullets in a plastic evidence bag, each one carefully labeled with a date, 2019, 2020, 2021, and an empty slot where a 4th should have been. The slot was labeled 2022. Garrett had fired his gun 4 times over the years, extracted the bullets and saved them. Why? What kind of twisted psychology leads someone to preserve the ballistic fingerprint of their weapon? When I confronted him with the evidence, Garrett laughed. Actually laughed, a sound without joy that echoed off the concrete walls of the interrogation room. "You think you figured it out," he said. "You think you understand. Help me understand then. Why save the bullets? Insurance." He leaned back in his chair, handcuffs clinking. "In my world, detective, everything is leverage. Everything is potential currency. Those bullets, they were my guarantee. If anyone ever tried to frame me for a shooting using my gun, I had proof that the weapon had been in my possession all along, that I controlled its ballistic signature. They were supposed to protect me. Protect you from what? From exactly what's happening now. From someone who knew about those bullets, who stole one, who used it to kill Vivian and make it look like I did it. Someone who understood that the gun being destroyed on video would make it seem impossible, would make me look guilty of something supernatural rather than just guilty of murder. Who would know about the bullets? Only one person, the person I trusted more than anyone. My brother, Clayton. I hadn't known Garrett had a brother. Clayton Holloway had stayed out of the spotlight, managing the mining operations while Garrett played the celebrity billionaire. Older by 3 years, quieter, more calculating, and according to Garrett, the only other person who knew about the safe, the bullets, the insurance policy. "Clayton wanted me gone," Garrett said. "Not dead, just discredited, imprisoned, out of the way. With me in jail for Vivian's murder, he takes control of the company, all of it. $8 billion and the legacy I built. And he does it with my own bullet, making the crime seem impossible, making sure I look guilty even as I protest my innocence." I found Clayton at the corporate headquarters in Phoenix, sitting in an office that overlooked the city like a throne room. He was everything Garrett wasn't, polished, professional, dressed in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. When I asked him about the bullets, he didn't flinch. "Garrett's trying to shift blame," he said calmly. "Classic narcissist behavior. He killed Vivian in a rage, realized what he'd done, and now he's spinning conspiracy theories to avoid responsibility. I had nothing to do with this. But you knew about the bullets? I knew Garrett was paranoid. He told me about his insurance years ago. I thought it was insane then, and I think it's insane now. But knowing about something and using it are very different things. Detective. Where were you the night Vivian died? In San Francisco. I have hotel records, credit card receipts, witnesses who saw me at a business dinner. I was 400 miles away. The alibi checked out. Clayton had been exactly where he claimed, surrounded by witnesses when Vivian died. But an alibi doesn't mean innocence. It just means you're smart enough to be somewhere else when the trigger gets pulled. I spent weeks chasing leads that went nowhere. Oliver had an alibi. He'd been working a night shift at the garage, time cards and security footage confirming his presence. The housekeeper, the groundskeeper, every staff member checked out. I looked into Vivian's own life, wondering if she'd made enemies, if someone from her past had surfaced with violence in mind. Nothing. Dead ends in every direction. The case went to trial. The prosecutor was confident. Powder residue, DNA, motive, opportunity, the impossible bullet that pointed to Garrett and no one else. The defense tried to present the theory about Clayton, about the stolen bullet, about conspiracy. But without hard evidence, it sounded like exactly what Clayton had called it. The desperate fantasy of a guilty man. I testified. I laid out the evidence, the timeline, the ballistics. I watched the jury's faces as they absorbed the impossible paradox of the destroyed gun and the surviving bullet. I saw them trying to reconcile what they knew to be true with what the evidence showed. In the end, evidence won. It always does. Garrett Holloway was convicted of first-degree murder, life without parole. The Gold King on wheels would spend the rest of his days in a cell, trading his custom Harley for a prison bunk, his empire for a 6-by-8-foot concrete box. I should have felt satisfaction. Justice served, case closed, another monster behind bars. But I didn't. I felt hollow. Because 3 days after the verdict, I received a package at my office. No return address, postmarked from Mexico City. Inside was a thumb drive and a handwritten note on expensive stationery. Detective Caney, you arrested the right man for the wrong reason. He's guilty, just not of what you think. The truth is on this drive. Whether you reveal it is up to you. Some secrets are worth keeping. V.V. Vivian. My hands shook as I plugged the drive into my computer. The video file loaded slowly, buffering in chunks. And then I saw her, Vivian Holloway, sitting in what looked like a hotel room, wearing the same champagne nightgown she died in. The timestamp on the video showed it had been recorded the night of her murder, hours before she died. If you're watching this, she said to the camera, then I'm dead and Garrett has been arrested for killing me. And that's exactly what was supposed to happen. I listened as Vivian confessed to staging her own murder. How she'd known about Garrett's hidden bullets for years, having discovered the safe by accident. How she'd stolen one, knowing its impossible provenance would make the crime seem supernatural, would ensure Garrett's conviction, even as he claimed innocence. How she'd hired someone, she never said who, to shoot her with that bullet at a specific time when Garrett would have no alibi, when the powder residue could be planted on his hands while he slept in his workshop, when every piece of evidence would point to him and him alone. Garrett didn't kill me, she said, and I could hear the pain in her voice, the weight of what she was confessing. But he killed Thomas Merrick 26 years ago. I've known for 15 years. I found evidence he deliberately sabotaged those support beams, caused the collapse that killed his partner. And he got away with it, built his fortune on a dead man's grave. The police never proved it, never convicted him. So I decided to do it myself. Different crime, same punishment. He deserves to be in prison, detective, just not for this. The video ended with her staring into the camera, tears running down her face. Oliver, she said, my son, if you ever see this, know that I loved you. Know that I did this to give you a future free from the shadow of a murderer. Garrett would never have left you alone, never have accepted you. This was the only way. Forgive me. I sat in my office until dawn, the video file still frozen on my screen, Vivian's final frame staring at me. I thought about justice and revenge and the impossible choices we make when the law fails us. I thought about Garrett, sitting in prison for a murder he didn't commit, guilty of a different murder he'd gotten away with decades ago. I thought about Clayton, who'd unknowingly gotten exactly what he wanted through someone else's vengeful sacrifice. I thought about Oliver, who would grow up knowing his mother had died to protect him from the truth about his stepfather. And I thought about myself, about what I would do with this knowledge. The evidence on that drive could overturn Garrett's conviction. It could reveal Vivian's conspiracy. It could unravel everything, but it would also let a murderer go free. Because while Garrett didn't kill Vivian, he did kill Thomas Merrick. And without Vivian's confession, without her sacrifice, that crime would remain unpunished forever. I destroyed the drive, burned it in my kitchen sink, watched the plastic melt and the circuits fuse. I told myself I was protecting justice, that Garrett belonged in prison, that the ends justified the means. But late at night, when I can't sleep, I wonder if I'm any different from Vivian. If I've just committed my own version of her crime, deciding what justice means, who deserves punishment, which rules apply to whom. The case is closed. The Gold King on wheels is behind bars. The impossible bullet has been explained, filed away, archived. Everyone believes they know what happened. But I know the truth. And now, so do you. So here's my question for you, the one that keeps me awake. Was Vivian a victim or a villain? Was her death justice or murder? And what would you do if you discovered that the person you convicted was guilty? Just not of the crime you convicted them for. Would you accept that compromise? Or would you demand the messier, more complicated truth? Think about it. Leave your thoughts in the comments because these questions don't have easy answers, and I need to know I'm not alone in struggling with them. Subscribe to this channel and leave your like for more stories of crimes, secrets of powerful families, and investigations that no one dares to tell. Until the next case.